I'm Debbie Sanders. I'm here today in what I hope will become one of many recurring episodes of what would have been my book, The Spiritual Path to Passing the Bar. But I've been teaching the bar for so many years and have been so consumed with that work that I haven't written the book. I was signed to write the book. The book is derived of the work that I do. And I think in my, own progression in my work, I found that that part of my work, the spiritual path to passing the bar, the human element, the difficulties that people encounter in doing, regular bar prep, has gained a certain prominence and emphasis in my work that makes it the large part of what I do. So over the years, of course, I've gained a reputation for being really open and amenable to the idea of teaching humans, at the human level, understanding the test is generally one dimensional and human beings are complex and, wired differently and have different emotional set points and have different ways of processing information. Their computers work differently. They have different backgrounds, cultural inclinations, academic, histories. And so teaching the same test to everyone, takes on all of those different dimensions at the human level. And just because of my personal background and who I am, that will sort of come out, I guess, over time in our moments together. I think that that is where I have placed my emphasis because I find the people that I teach to be generally extraordinary humans. If you're taking a bar exam, if you graduated from law school and you did all the things to get to that place, you are an extraordinary, rare person. I said rare because it is rare to sit for a bar exam anywhere in the world. In fact, statistically, more rare than participating in the Olympics, which used to be my measure before. Think of this, as the Olympics. But because you're surrounded by yourself and your expectation of high performance and other people who have been doing that too, law students and bar students forget that they're doing something really hard. And because I did it, in an unusual way in my own life, I think that I had more reflection about how difficult it was and a reference point of another lifetime where I wasn't doing those kinds of things. Though I did other difficult things, but still, I think that I have always been interested in the impact of the test on people taking it. And my work, the course that I teach comes from the course that I created for myself in law school. So I really understand the entire emotional journey really well. Though I couldn't say I understand it for you, I can say I've had thousands of students in my rearview mirror over the decades I've been teaching. And so I kind of have collected, all the people there are taking this test in certain temperaments, but individuals, every one of them being unique, I teach sort of the same test to different brains. And I've had to adapt what I do, to have people receive the work that I am doing in a way that's effective for them. I'm here in this platform and hopefully over these coming weeks and months, trying to give people a space to respect that other part of the test that doesn't sort of show up in a commercial outline or a video lecture or a commercial course for that matter. I think I'm really super good at teaching the bar. It's kind of, my extraordinary power. I have figured the test out in a way that's methodical, and so I'm proud of that. It's something that people need from me. And if I had to say what do people want from me, generally I would say tell them what to do every day and, you know, buffer them in the other impacts where impediments of spirit and emotion are exploited through the difficulty of this process. And that part is, sometimes takes me to my depth of capacity as a human, and sometimes it's like, right in my wheelhouse where I live. Either way, it's always meaningful. And so I want to show up in these regular moments and talk about some of those things, especially as we approach bar season, that, get in the way of people feeling like they can continue to do this work every day or at all and get through it. I don't expect anyone to become, casual or cavalier about passing the bar exam. On the other hand, I want to say that if you're sitting for it, if you've been accepted to sit for it and you've filled out the application, then you've done all the things necessary for me to be able to tell you you are greater than this test in your component parts. You've already done harder things in this test. That is not just a warm, fuzzy expression of, emotional support. It's a truth. You've done way harder things in the course of trying to graduate from law school or get to law school for that matter. And I want to focus on those things as much as I can, but of course, I'm not talking about, just saying nice, supportive things to people while they're struggling. I think there is a real sort of body of work in bar prep that requires its own space and time to recognize, that what you're doing from day to day will change emotionally. And for myself, one thing that led me to this work is my own experience of feeling maybe hour to hour differently. I can do this in 1 hour. I can't do it in another hour. Everything that I've put into this is going to be wasted. Just the fear of failure, for people who are high achieving itself is extraordinary. And what you think the expectation is, because, it's sort of inextricable. My idea about bar prep is different than the commercial idea. So if you think that you need to memorize thousands of doctrinal concepts, and I'll just give that part away. That's really not what the bar exam asks for. So if that's what you're doing for it, those two skills will cross. It wants something very specific. I wouldn't say it's hard so much as it is specific, and you have to give it what it wants. That is not a joke. But it's a knowable test. It's been administered for a very long time, so it has a lot of history that you can use to glean ideas about what it wants. The challenge for most people there is that, coming up with a process that's predictable and not just random doing stuff, based on past tests, is where you need someone who's professional. So I give myself, lots of credit for doing that well. It is a thing I do well. It's what I do for a living. But I think that I'm starting to find that there's sort of an urge within me to do more of the other work on a broader scale, because there is practically no person I need. And I will say, maybe there 10% of the people just want the course, only the course. Let me get out of this lesson, do my work and pass. But 90% of my students want the other layer of things. How should I be feeling right now? Is it normal that, or my favorite questions, should I be afraid that, which always, makes me sort of laugh, because if I ever answer yes to that, nothing good can come from that. So don't ask that question. It's not good for your spirit. But I do know, at the deepest level of emotional stress, that this exam, can take the most seemingly pulled together person and expose all of their weakest parts. Impediments of spirit oftentimes look like anxiety, avoidance, self-belief issues, the, predisposition to collapse into overwhelming stress, avoidance, denial. I think most people take the bar exam in a state of denial, which probably prospers them, because they don't have any idea, how much they don't know going into it. And there is a lot of faith involved in that act. And a lot of people get lucky just based on the statistic that most people pass the first time. But, I would attribute that to a very marginal point pass rate, or a division between passing and failing people is fairly marginal, even though percentage-wise more people pass. So a lot of people do, quote, get lucky, not knowing exactly what they're walking into. But in the weeks leading up to that, without a guide, people do devolve quite a bit. And I always want to create a vulnerable space for people to show up, at their weakest point and just let me see it. I used to joke that my table was very heavy because I used to teach students there, and it held a lot of weight from the tears. I kind of expect, encourage, and embrace that. I think people waste a lot of energy, just practically speaking, not crying, So I don't say should walk around a complete, blithering mess all the time. You won't get anything done. But on the other hand, if you're holding back any emotional sort of like buildup under the pressure cooker of the work, letting it out sometimes is the most productive thing to do. And there are lots of those kinds of ideas I think that I have to walk people through on a regular basis, sometimes daily, depending on their need of me. But I wanted to create a space here on a regular basis, recognizing that there is a population of people out there preparing for this test, totally sort of untethered to a support system that knows what that's like with, concrete information on how to feel about it. Maybe some of it is practically what to do with it, but the important thing that I really want to provide is an idea about how to feel about it, because you can have a lot of thoughts on the way to taking the test that can be scary. And as a practical matter, one thing I recommend is that people kind of let themselves have the big cry, and then release the pressure and go back to work. But you can't hang out in those thoughts because they are paralyzing. And no one about to run a race in the Olympics is going to click their, cleat into the cage on the field and say, I'll never win this race. You just stay home. It's impossible to overcome that kind of emotional collapse. So I want to bring forward some of the ideas that I've learned over time about the emotional aspects and the spiritual aspects of this test. And as a spiritual matter, since people don't typically think about the bar exam as spiritual, I just would say that, the difficulty that it presents is part of your evolution as a person. And sometimes taking on those impediments, avoidance, denial, excessive anxiety, sometimes those are indulgent, to be honest, just to give in to those thoughts on the regular. I find taking those things on in bar prep can sometimes help people have transformations within themselves that are lifelong, just because they took on that thing in real time while falling apart and overcame it. And emotionally in the same way, just learning how to confront the bigness of the test, keeping in mind it is far inferior to practicing law. So even though we elevate the test in this way in stature, it's really not nearly as hard as practicing law, which is the thing you want from the license. So it's important for me to bring that back into perspective, because for that reason, back to the emotional and spiritual aspects of this test, if the exam bested you, even if it feels like the worst thing that ever happened to you, like everything that ever, quote, happened to me in my life, in retrospect, I see everything sort of lined itself up exactly for where I was ready in my life and what I needed to have happen. I know it sounds really kitschy, everything happens for a reason, and I'm not prepared to say anything like that because I think it's too small an idea for what I'm trying to say. I'm really trying to say, one, if you didn't pass, you need to be worthy of the license, because lawyering is so much harder than bar taking, that you don't want to pass until you're ready. If it's, blowing you out of the water emotionally, you don't want to be in somebody's courtroom. That's a real thing. Um, and then on the other hand, sometimes you think you want a thing to happen, but for whatever reason, you are not, as a person, at that state of readiness. And all the interruptions wind up getting you to that state better. So if you're here in front of me because something interrupted your path, and you are taking this test again, just know that most of my people are those. And I never distinguish intellect from bar passing. In fact, most people, like I said, get by with such a small margin of points that no one could attribute any meaningful statistic to, or measure for that matter, to the passers versus the non-passers. By and large, 10 to 15 points, is the spread. And that doesn't really speak to the 30, 50, 60 point people, but even those people, sometimes they just sort of threw something out there and just wanted to get through the thing to say they did it. There are a lot of reasons people don't pass a bar exam. Sometimes they don't prep at all because they shut down. Sometimes they do a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with what the test requires, which is most of what I see. Sometimes people have sort of self-sabotaging mechanisms that don't allow them to give all their effort, and a lot of times that's driven by a defense mechanism to protect yourself from the outcome if you do give it your all. So those are the things that I regularly deal with in the spirit end of this work. And since those things are sort of walking around in the human container, they really need to be reckoned with in order to pass this test. And they happen to people taking it the first time and the second and the fifth. For me, I took the test once, figured it out in a way that was more practical, to the idea that the test is an artificial construct. The LSAT, was artificial, didn't help in law school. Law school is artificial, doesn't really help in bar taking. It helps in other ways in the sense that it will be a cultural indoctrination into the ways of being a lawyer. But it doesn't really help practically for taking the bar, even if you had some classes. Most of them that you have in law school are, they're, well, I'll put it this way. Many of the subjects showing up at the bar exam are not in your law school transcript, even if you have some, because everyone takes different classes. Schools don't all offer every class. So law school doesn't really prepare you for the bar exam in a direct practical way, and that is maddening to some people, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It has its own place. And the bar exam doesn't really prepare you for lawyering. Same idea, not a bad thing. It has its own place. But the thing is that if you don't get a license, that means you haven't achieved minimal competence, then when you're out there lawyering, and it's so much harder to lawyer than to bar exam, you'll find yourself not able to draw on an idea of minimal competence, or that measure that makes people across the board safe to practice law. And in the beginning, all you're drawing on is self-belief and confidence in the idea that you passed a bar exam. So you really need that. That's really practical, as well as very deeply spiritual, in the idea that I think you need to step into your capacity as a person ready. And many times, people say, well, I'll just keep taking it till I pass. You don't really need to keep taking it till you pass. You really only need to take it one time and do the right things. But your spirit might need to do that a few times before you're ready to walk into a courtroom, say your name, say who you're representing, and deal with somebody, who is physically elevated to you, and be able to take that on as a person. So I find a lot of meaning in that. And for that reason, I'm wanting the work that we do together. And when I say work, all of these steps in the process to passing the bar, they're just sort of incremental things that build you as a lawyer. I want that to be part of what we're doing in our time together. And I want to start to reach a broader base of people who are not coming to me already as an injured soul, and just provide the wisdom that I have about how much of you, is in this work. And to know that a person wrote a law school essay really claiming, abilities at that time that you didn't really have, even though you did many things to get to law school. When you talk about your contribution to law school, your perspective abilities in law school, those are all theoretical, because nothing is like law school. But you have belief in yourself when you write those things. Interesting to me is that people taking the bar exam, don't really have so much belief in themselves when they've already been qualified at a certain level. Whereas in the other scenario, you were not so qualified. You just believed in yourself. So a lot of my work and my job and my goal in these moments with people at large and my individual students is to reintroduce them to that part of themselves that knew their value and worth as a given, and then you just do what you have to do. Sometimes I joke to my students, like, if I just give you the sign of the cross and say, bless you, you have passed. Just do the work. There is really something to that. Like, I can sort of just hand you passing in a certain way if you do the work, and you inhabit that idea that you're entitled to it, and that it will happen for you. You didn't probably walk around most of law school wondering if you were going to graduate. You wouldn't have gotten very far. You just, muscled through and felt terrified a lot. If you were me, I was terrified a lot. I graduated really well, but didn't really know a whole lot when I walked out of that building, to be honest. So I just always felt, like, oh, I just have to get through today. But I didn't question whether I was going to do the whole thing. So something about the lure of this test makes people feel differently about it as it relates to their personal ability. So that's what I plan on doing in this time. These incremental episodes of the spiritual path to passing the bar will eventually allow me to finish writing the book that I've been signed to write for so long. And I'm just going to, signing off, tell you that I'm going to come here raw, straightforward, direct. Some of the things I've been called over the years, most of them very loving and really great indicators of how I want to be taken by all of you. But some people have said things to me, that were sort of amusing. I had a girl from Texas call me a Yankee. I am direct, straightforward, as much as I am warm, maternal, supportive. I want people to pass the bar. So I am straightforward and direct in that way. And so I'm coming to you sort of unfiltered. I'm not terribly made up. You can see that I'm in a raw condition here. That's how I teach. I teach this way. This office space, you'll see my dogs, in the background periodically. And I want to come to you in that way so that you can come to me, with your full raw self. And I think it's possible that you can find what you need here to overcome the parts of the bar that are not being addressed by your commercial bar courses. Okay, so I'm signing off. Again, my name is Debbie Sanders. I teach through Bar None Prep in New Jersey, but I teach throughout the country because I have, a UBE course. And I write a column on the National Jurist that's largely derived of my essays or emails that I send to students when they're about to take the test. Lots of the motivational stuff. And I'm not necessarily interested in picking up students. I teach one person at a time, so I don't necessarily have a commercial capacity, but I really am interested in growing the idea of this work so that people can normalize that emotional, spiritual difficulty of doing this thing and just getting back to a state of loving themselves as the person, in their law school essay. Okay, signing off for now, and hopefully I will get enough feedback, commentary to do this again. I'll see you soon.